In a quiet suburban neighborhood, Angela and Mark seemed like the perfect couple. They had been together for 6 years and recently celebrated their 3rd wedding anniversary. Their friends often admired their bond, and Angela's pregnancy announcement only added to the joy around them. Mark was ecstatic, and they both eagerly prepared for the arrival of their first child, decorating the nursery and planning for a future they believed would be perfect. The day finally came, and Angela went into labor. Hours later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. However, when the nurse brought the baby into the room, a heavy silence settled over everyone. The baby had dark skin, and Mark's face turned from joy to a look of shock and disbelief. He stormed out of the hospital room without a word, leaving Angela in tears. The nurses and doctors whispered, unsure of how to console her, as Mark refused to return to the room or even hold his child. Later that night, Mark sent Angela a furious text. "How could you betray me like this? I thought I knew you." Angela tried to call him, but he wouldn't answer. Friends and family began to talk too, some expressing sympathy for Mark, assuming Angela had been unfaithful. Despite her protests, no one seemed to believe her claims that she'd never cheated on Mark. Feeling alone and desperate, Angela decided to take matters into her own hands. She ordered a DNA test to prove the child's paternity, hoping it would clear her name and save her marriage. Mark reluctantly agreed, but only because he wanted to know the truth. He'd moved out, and in every conversation, he grew colder and more distant, convinced he'd been deceived. The test results came back 2 weeks later, and Angela couldn't believe her eyes. The child was indeed biologically Mark's, but another surprising detail stood out. Mark carried genes that traced back to African ancestry. In disbelief, they went through the records and spoke with geneticists, who explained that certain traits can reappear generations later, even if they hadn't shown up in recent family history. Mark was stunned but reluctantly accepted the reality that his daughter was indeed his biological child. However, just as they thought this shocking revelation would bring closure, Mark's parents reached out with a request for a private family meeting. They had an unsettling confession. Mark's great-grandfather had a secret second family, one they had hidden for decades. The child from this second family had lived a very different life, far from the privilege and security Mark's family enjoyed. Intrigued, Angela and Mark began investigating this long-lost branch of the family tree, piecing together clues from old letters, documents, and family anecdotes. As they dug deeper, they uncovered an elaborate web of lies and deceptions, stretching back generations. Mark's ancestors had gone to great lengths to hide this part of their history, fearing it would tarnish the family's reputation. But there was more. Among the documents, they found evidence linking their family to an unsolved mystery involving a lost inheritance that had been meant for the descendants of Mark's great-grandfather's second family. Angela realized that their daughter, as the first of this new generation, was technically the rightful heir to this forgotten legacy. And with that inheritance came an unexpected fortune, one that Mark's ancestors had hidden for years to keep it from ever being claimed by the rightful heirs. As the pieces came together, Mark found himself grappling with guilt, realizing how his own biases had nearly cost him his family. Meanwhile, Angela saw this as an opportunity to bridge a broken history, to reconnect with the family's long-lost relatives and heal old wounds. Just when they thought the surprises were over, they received a letter from a distant cousin who had heard about the news through a family acquaintance. This cousin, a historian, shared documents hinting that Mark's great-grandfather had been involved in more than just an affair. He had played a role in major historical events that the family had also concealed. Curiosity now fully ignited, Angela and Mark met with the distant cousin, Daniel, who seemed just as intrigued by the resurfaced family history. Daniel had spent years researching their great-grandfather's life, and he showed them records indicating that the man had been involved in civil rights movements in the early 1900s. Advocating for equality and secretly funding schools for underprivileged black communities. Despite the family's attempts to bury this part of their past, their great-grandfather had been deeply committed to supporting justice, risking his reputation and wealth to help others. But when his involvement was discovered, he had been pressured to cut ties with his second family to protect the family's social standing and avoid public scandal. His intentions had been noble, yet his legacy had been twisted and buried in shame. And it wasn't just Mark's parents who had kept it hidden. Multiple generations had chosen silence to maintain their status. Angela was moved, both by the great-grandfather's legacy and by the story of the forgotten family who had been deprived of a history that could have changed their lives. Mark's own guilt deepened as he realized he had unfairly judged Angela and even his daughter. He now saw that his own actions mirrored the prejudice and bias that had haunted his family for generations. Determined to set things right, Angela and Mark decided to bring the whole family together, both sides old and new, near and far, for a reunion and reconciliation. They wanted to honor the forgotten legacy and offer apologies for the injustices of the past. The reunion was tense at first, with relatives wary of uncovering old secrets and reopening wounds. But as the evening wore on, stories were shared, laughter broke through the initial awkwardness, and people began to open up about their own experiences. Many had lived with questions about their ancestry, some even knowing fragments of the family's hidden story, but never fully understanding its significance. As the night went on, an unexpected figure approached Mark, an elderly woman who introduced herself as the last surviving child from the second family. With tearful eyes, she told Mark and Angela about the hardships she and her siblings had faced, unaware of their true family connections, and growing up in poverty. She described the relief of finally understanding why life had felt incomplete, why there were pieces that never quite fit. In that moment, Angela held her daughter close, looking around at the gathered family with renewed gratitude. This once broken family was slowly finding its way to healing, and the hidden legacy of their great-grandfather was no longer a source of shame, but a story of resilience and connection. In the end, Mark learned a lesson that would stay with him forever. Real family wasn't defined by secrets or mistakes, but by the bonds they now chose to rebuild, piece by piece. And Angela, once shunned and doubted, became the very heart that held their fractured family together, ensuring that their daughter would grow up knowing her roots and the remarkable strength of the generations before her. As the reunion continued, Mark approached the elderly woman, feeling both remorseful and inspired. She gently took his hand and said, "You are the first of the family to try and make amends. That's more than anyone else has done." Her forgiveness was a balm to Mark, and Angela felt a renewed pride in her husband's transformation. They spent the evening sharing stories, learning about struggles, triumphs, and dreams unfulfilled, all part of a legacy now embraced, not hidden. Angela decided to use her skills to document their family's journey, hoping to create a meaningful record for future generations. She captured the reunion's heartfelt moments in photos and videos, later turning them into a small family documentary, symbolizing their promise to honor the truth. By the night's end, Angela looked around, her heart full. She knew her daughter would grow up surrounded by love, with both sides of her heritage proudly acknowledged. The once shattered family, through honesty and resilience, had finally healed. If you found this story moving, please consider subscribing to my channel for more tales of transformation, hope, and the strength of family bonds. Don't miss out on future stories that inspire and connect us all.